So, last week we discussed about temple guards. Today we're going to discuss a fascinating topic about the covenant of the Ark. And of course, this is something that has inspired many movies, many documentaries. Anyone here heard of Indiana Jones? Right? Raiders of the Lost Ark. We'll see. Indiana Jones, just as a spoiler, did not find the Ark, or at least whatever the movie, I'm not sure where they found it, but it wasn't there. But it's definitely something that's engaged the minds of archaeologists, historians, scholars alike. Everybody's been on this mission, and as we'll see at the end of the class, a fascinating piece of history. Even the rabbis were determined to find the Ark. One rabbi felt if he was to discover the Ark, Mashiach will come, and therefore he made it his life's mission. It was his vision. It was his dream, and that I don't want to give away too much. That's going to be at the end. A fascinating piece of history. So to figure out where's the Ark, well, first of all, what is the Ark? The Ark, just for basic information, the Ark, of course, was God commanded the Jewish people after they got the Torah in Mount Sinai in the desert. God told Moses to tell the Jews to build a tabernacle, the Mishkan. And the Mishkan had all different elements. It had the altar where they would offer sacrifices. It had the menorah where they would light the menorah every day, and so on. So the primary vessel and element of the tabernacle, and eventually the Beis Hamikdash, when it came to Jerusalem, was the Ark. Only the Kohen Gadol, one man, one time a year, in one place, the holiest person, the holiest space, and the holiest time. On Yom Kippur, the service, when the Kohen Gadol, representing the Jewish people, would go inside to achieve atonement on behalf of the people, and there was a whole ritual. He would come with a pan with coals, and they would offer incense and place it between the two cherubs, right? You may recall that image, where is it over there? You would place it in between the two cherubs, and right then there would be like a divine sign. The cherubs would smile or something, and that would give that was the green light that the Jews were forgiven. And then when the Kohen Gadol came out, there was a massive celebration, and we actually read about this on the Yom Kippur service. There's the part of the service when everybody goes to sleep or walks away. There's like a really, really long part. It's called the Avodah. And it's actually fascinating stuff. If you read the English, you read the celebration and the joy that happened on Yom Kippur. Well, first of all, there was a celebration that the Kohen Gadol made it out alive, because it was such a holy, intense moment in such close proximity to God. It's the closest space, the closest spot one can get to in terms of connection to the divine presence. So that was the Ark, and it had a whole long history from the time it was in the desert until it made it on its way to the land of Israel. When they conquered Israel, it was actually played a major role in bringing down the walls of Jericho. The Kohen Gadol carried it, the priests. It was actually kidnapped at one point by the Philistines, and that brought tremendous destruction to them. They decided to send it back to the Jews after they stole it, because this was like a very coveted item. And they're like, actually, we don't want any of this, because it was causing all kinds of problems for them, to their community. It was bringing diseases and famine. So it belonged in Jerusalem, it belonged in the temple. There was another big celebration when King David finally brought it home. And it was in the first temple, and that's where it played its major role. Then, eventually in history, comes along, we mentioned before about Ezekiel the prophet and the destruction of the first temple. And then eventually there was the second temple, which we spent time discussing a little bit last week. On Shabbat we spoke about the second temple. But basically the second temple is missing some key elements, and one of them, or the main one, was this Ark. So the Ark actually housed in it a few important items. Most importantly, it housed the tablets that Moses came down, that God gave our constitution of the Jewish people, and also the broken tablets, and also which symbolized that whole story of forgiveness. It was all in that Ark, in this box. So this is a very, very important item. It had a few other items we'll see in a moment, but it wasn't there in the second temple, and that's where our discussion kind of is going to pick up. Where did it go? Without the Ark, how do you do the service? How do you do Yom Kippur? So we're going to see it wasn't around in the second temple, seemingly. We're going to show the Rebbe's novel insight and the Rebbe's opinion, actually how they were able to still proceed with the service, contrary to what maybe other opinions say. But of course, we want to figure out, where is the Ark today? That is the $1 million question that, again, has sparked many a documentary, many movies, many books, and all kinds of archaeologists with their own theories and claims. And if you Google where is the Ark of the Covenant, you'll have a stream of websites and articles and readings about this topic, and we're going to try to kind of stay on the Torah path, the Torah tradition of what actually Torah says about where the ark is today. Because believe it or not, we do have insight on this matter. So first, our go-to source is going to be the Rambam that you have in the source sheet. And the Rambam says as follows. The Rambam, in his Laws of the Temple, he describes the construction of the temple and the vessels of the temple. And then in chapter 4, interestingly enough, he starts talking about the ark. Now he does have a chapter dedicated to all the vessels, which is in the earlier chapter. But in chapter 4, he decides to talk about the ark, kind of giving it its own category, which is interesting for itself. Chapter 4 is mainly about the actual physical building of the temple, the actual construction and the measurements and so on. So it's interesting that it's over there that he chooses to discuss the ark. In a moment, we'll understand why. So he says as follows. He tells us that there was a stone in the western portion of the Holy of Holies on which the ark was placed. This stone is known as, in Hebrew, as the Even Ashtia, the foundation stone. Some people believe that it's where the Dome of the Rock is. This is the Dome of the Rock. This is the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That is the very contentious area. And underneath the dome, some people believe, is where the foundation stone is. Why is it called the foundation stone? Tradition says that this is the stone that God fashioned the whole world. So this is the epicenter of the universe. The Rambam says as follows. There was a stone in the western portion of the Holy of Holies on which the ark was placed. Before it was placed, there was a jug of manna, Aaron's staff. And then he says, when Shlomo, King Solomon, constructed the temple, knowing that it would ultimately be destroyed, he constructed a place for the ark to be entombed below the Holy of Holies in deep maze-like vaults. King Yoshio commanded, I'll explain in a moment, commanded the ark be entombed in the chamber which Shlomo had built, as it's written, and he told the Levites who were granted understanding above all of Israel and who were consecrated unto God, place the holy ark in the chamber built by Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. So there's a number of problems that the Rebbe raises with this passage of Maimonides. First of all, to appreciate a little bit, what is this Maimonides that we're studying? Mishnah Torah is the first formal code of Jewish law in Jewish history. The Rambam uniquely, the first time, took all the Talmudic discussions, kind of cropped out all the debates, and put together concisely what a person has to do in their day-to-day life, in their day-to-day Jewish experience. So he's not a book of history, he's not a book of archaeology. As he himself professes in his introduction, I'm writing this book to know, for the layman to know clearly what they need to do. The most basic, simple instructions. So the fact that he includes over here a whole lengthy history about the ark is very, very strange. And this is a question that's actually raised by a number of commentators on the Rambam. Why does he write this whole history? He could have told us very simply that the ark was placed in a vault. He didn't have to go through the whole description about King Solomon and King Yoshio and so on. Furthermore, as is pointed out by other commentators, this is actually not the only opinion about where the ark is. In the Talmud, there's actually about 3 or so different opinions about where the ark ended up. According to one opinion, it's not in the Temple Mount today. It actually was taken during the Babylonian siege that we're marking in Tisha B'Av. It was taken to Babylon. Some people think it was even taken to the Vatican in the Roman times, the Roman Empire, although that's very unlikely. But there is an opinion in the Talmud that says that the Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, he confiscated it. He was aware of this national treasure, and he took it and he stole it and he brought it back to Babylon. Where it is today, we have no idea. Only when Mashiach comes. Another opinion says that it was buried under the temple, but not under where the Rambam describes, but actually was buried under the part of the temple. There was a storage room it was called the storage room for wood, where that's where they would pile up wood and gather wood for the altar. And the Talmud actually goes on to describe a story about how one day there were 2 priests who were working in that area, and one priest, as he was doing his rounds and collecting wood and whatever he was doing, he noticed that one of the tiles on the floor was a little bit higher than the other ones, and instantly realizing that there was a trapdoor underneath. Another story, the Talmud has a different version where it says that he dropped an axe and it fell on the floor and he heard it was hollow. So he knew instantly that there was a tunnel beneath there, and just when he was about to run to tell his friend, he dies. So, in other words, it was supposed to remain a secret. The Talmud has a couple of stories similar to that idea, that every time somebody almost was on this close to discovering this ancient tunnel. But either way, the fact that the Rambam number one, includes archaeology or a piece of history in his code of Jewish law is very strange, right? In other words, this is a fascinating piece of history, but what practical relevance does it have in Jewish law? Like, what does it mean to us in terms of Jewish, deciding Jewish law? And second of all, why is he conveniently siding with one opinion? There are other opinions. It's a historical debate. Whenever there's a debate in Talmudic history, when the Talmud is having an argument about something historical in Jewish history, it's not like we have to go with one over the other. There's different opinions. It doesn't have any practical relevance. It's a matter of historical difference, and it is what it is. The Rambam is deciding to go like one opinion. He's conveniently saying that no, the ark was buried under the Temple Mount in a specific spot that King Solomon built. So it's very, very interesting that he does that. The Rabbi explains that Maimonides, the Rambam, he isn't stepping into archaeology. He's not going out of his lane. He's talking in his field. He's actually ruling on a very important legal issue. And that is that in the laws of the temple, he's telling us that when dealing with the structure of the temple and how it was built, you should know that the Holy of Holies that housed the ark, there was actually two places for it. There was the open revealed spot, and then there was this maze-like vault, this hidden space that nobody was aware of. In other words, this wasn't just a archaeological finding or historical narrative, but he's telling you from the very inception, when King Solomon built the temple, knowing that one day it was going to be destroyed, as he's building the temple, he also builds a vault. In other words, he creates an alternative space to house the ark. So in the very first instance, as we say in Talmudic language, lechatchila, he built two spots. There was always two spaces for the ark. It wasn't like only an emergency situation, because this is the very beginning, when things were actually good, and was a tremendous celebration. So that's the irony of it. When they're celebrating, dedicating the first temple, King Solomon finally builds a temple, and it houses the divine presence, and there was a massive party, and they were celebrating for 2 weeks, so much so that actually the celebration went through Yom Kippur, to the point that everybody was eating on Yom Kippur. And then they were all scared, and then a voice from heaven came down and said that every single person who rejoiced merits Olam Haba, that actually it was the right thing to do.
Wow.
It was the only time in history that Yom Kippur was cancelled. Can you imagine? Fast day is cancelled.
I can't wait.
Yeah. It was a taste of Mashiach.
Yeah.
So, in other words, just like the White House today has an underground bunker in case of emergency, the president has to go to do his operations from. So the temple originally, from the very beginning, always had an alternative spot to house the ark. So when Maimonides is discussing the hiding of the ark, he's not explaining just its historical fate. He's clarifying a law in the temple construction. He's saying that when the temple was built, they built a revealed space and a concealed space. And this also understands why he chose to include it in chapter 4. You see, the Rambam has a chapter dedicated to the vessels. In that chapter, he talks about all the vessels. He doesn't talk about the ark that we're discussing today. When does he talk about the ark? In chapter 4, when he starts talking about the construction of the temple. Because the Rambam explains the ark is unique in that it's not just a vessel, but it's part and parcel of the very construction itself. It's part of the building. For the temple to be a place that houses God's presence, the building needs to have the ark. It could survive. If God forbid the other elements, as sometimes happens, as you see in history, were missing, it was still possible to conduct the service. If you don't have the ark, you can't do the service, which also explains why King Yoshiyahu, many years later, was able to hide it. Because seemingly what he did was inappropriate. How could you hide the ark? How are you supposed to do Yom Kippur? How could you do the most fundamental service in achieving atonement for the Jewish people? So again, the Rebbe explains, because that's precisely the point. He didn't hide the ark like it was gone. He placed it in the alternative space that was built by King Solomon. And just in case you think that it was only done out of emergency, King Yoshiyahu lived a good few years before the destruction of the temple. Times were pretty good for the Jewish people, certainly in times of King Solomon. So the fact that they built this maze-like vault already in good times teaches you that it wasn't just a space only for emergencies, but it's a space that's actually part of the temple. It's part of the physical structure. In other words, in order for the temple to be a temple, it needs to have two spots for the ark. A revealed space, and when necessary, an alternative space. Which gives us an even deeper understanding of the connection between all three temples. Because actually, we said before that the ark wasn't around for the second temple, but then how did they do the service? What this answers for us is that the ark was always there. It always gave the temple its holiness. And in fact, what we see from here is that all three temples, the first temple, the second temple, and God willing the third temple when Mashiach comes, are all really one. Because the foundation of every temple is the ark. And if the ark was hidden, that means, in this vault, in this maze-like vault, that means that as much as externally the temple building might have been destroyed, demolished, but the essence of the temple, the ark, was always there. A physical piece of that temple, which according to the Rambam is actually the essence of the temple. It's part of the construction of the temple, that what makes it a temple is always there and has never been destroyed. Now, enemies have never been able to touch it and never been able to find it despite all the attempts. So the first, second, and third have like this unbroken chain, this link that connects them all together, that really it's like one long temple. Because externally, most parts of it were destroyed, but the core element, the ark, where it's hidden, is always there. King Solomon writes in the Song of Songs, he says, "I am sleeping, but my heart is awake." The temple looks like it's sleeping, looks like it's destroyed. You go there today and it looks like there's nothing there. But really you should know, although externally the person's eyes are sleeping, he's alive. His pulse is racing and his heart is pumping and his blood flowing. And this temple, the heart of the temple, which is the ark, is very much still beating, which also explains to us why, this gives us a little bit of an understanding of why the huge interest, why the fascination with this space, why thousands of years of conflict and blood, sweat, and guts being spilt for this space. And now we can have a better understanding, because this is not just any random piece of real estate. This is the most spiritually charged area in the universe. It's the foundation of everything. And to give a little, we mentioned about the different documentaries and archaeologists and historians have made attempts to build this temple, to find this missing ark. So here's a fascinating story. In case you're wondering why we don't try to look for it, many people have tried. So in 1969, a couple years after the Six-Day War, so the Six-Day War, of course, one of the major events of the Six-Day War, besides its general miraculous nature of how we completely, in just under a week, overwhelmed our enemies, was also the recapturing of Jerusalem, the liberation of Jerusalem, which was an extremely emotional event, and you could see pictures and the stories about how they blew the shofar and people were crying, and it was an unbelievable scene. Jews from all walks of life. So 2 years after the Six-Day War, when they liberated Jerusalem, there was finally an opportunity for archaeologists to go a little digging and to discover some treasures. Jerusalem is built like layers upon layers. So what you see now is a whole city underneath. Every time we were attacked, first by the Babylonians and then by the Byzantine Empire and the Romans, they kept building on top of it. So that's why there's just, still today, there's endless discoveries. They're constantly digging. But this specific area is not so simple, as you can imagine. So there was one particular rabbi behind this effort. His name was Rabbi Meir Yehuda Getz. He was born in Tunisia. He was a very spiritual, mystical individual, a very holy rabbi. And he lived actually in the north. And when his son fell in battle in Jerusalem, he felt he wanted to dedicate his life in memory of his son who fought for the Jewish people, for Israel. And he moved to Jerusalem. And eventually becoming, he had a very big reputation as being a tremendous rabbi and a tremendous mystic, he was appointed as the first official rabbi of the Kotel. He was the rabbi of the Western Wall. And he gave him a lot of power, he gave him a lot of leverage and a lot of connections with government officials and politicians and so on. And it was his dream to discover the Ark of the Covenant. He felt that if he could reveal, based on some Kabbalistic tradition, if he could discover the Ark, Mashiach would come, and that would liberate the Jewish people, and everything would be good. So he was very, very much passionate about this. This was his dream. And he hired he was very well versed in all these laws and temple descriptions and where it was and the different traditions. And he hires a team of diggers and archaeologists. And in 1971, he actually discovers a closed gate. When he found this gate, in all likelihood, he felt that this gate was the one this door would lead straight to the space where the Ark of the Covenant was. So he was extremely, extremely excited when they found this trapdoor or this gate. But he knew that to do this, he had to first consult other rabbis. You have to get rabbinic approval because as we mentioned last week, it's because of the holiness, because of the divine presence is still there. Like the Rambam himself paskins, he decides in Jewish law, he codifies that till today, the divine presence was never destroyed, and therefore we have to respect the area. And therefore, as you see when you go there, there's a big sign that says, based on the chief rabbin of Israel, that it's forbidden to enter this area because of the holiness. So he had to be careful where he was going, where he was digging. So he actually, before he decides to break through this gate, he knew that this was a big deal. So he poses his question to none other than the Rebbe. And he asks the Lubavitcher Rebbe, writing in great detail his excitement about this discovery and how this was his life's vision. And the Rebbe's response was unequivocal. The Rebbe writes to him and he says, first the Rebbe blesses him for the, for all his activities and the good things that he's doing for the Jewish people. The Rabbi of the Kosel, he was actually very much involved. If you go to the Kosel today, there's one of the most famous landmarks, I guess, is the Chabad Tefillin stand. That has probably the most tefillin record in all Chabad history. The amount of Jews that there's birthright groups, and it's unbelievable. So he was one of the rabbi in its very early inception, when the Rebbe instituted the tefillin campaign in the 6-day war. He actually is the one who got permission and permits for them to be there permanently, as a permanent presence. So he has a big merit for that. So the Rebbe, blesses him. They were very close, and then just casually the Rebbe writes, in addition to giving him thank you for the good news, particularly in canceling your plans to dig under the temple, just kind of adding that in there. So that was very unequivocal from the Rebbe to completely cease and desist from your excavations under the temple. So the Rebbe was very, very clear that this is not a good thing, not a good idea. It's actually very consistent with what we learned last week, as we'll see in a moment, that the Rebbe was very careful in his, for the Rebbe, the number one priority, this was his, I guess you could say, his political perspective on Israel, was national security. And everything else that compromised that wasn't worth it. Even the holiest spiritual pursuit, the Rebbe was very upset in the 6-day war, despite the miracles of the 6-day war, which the Rebbe himself acknowledged, but the fact that they were, when they were liberating Jerusalem, so they were trying to be careful not to damage any holy sites, and they sent in troops on the ground in a very specific way that actually led to a lot of death of Israeli soldiers, and that upset the Rebbe tremendously. Again, the context of the 6-day war, the Rebbe speaks about it, and the Rebbe calls it a miracle in our times. But in that specific mission in liberating Jerusalem, the Rebbe was very upset. The Rebbe says, better the entire Kosel should come crashing down than one Jew should die. It wasn't worth it for it. That was the Rebbe's perspective, and that consistently throughout his 40 years, always, Jewish life is number one, the preservation of life. So you could see this is consistent with the Rebbe's perspective, because obviously digging under this very provocative area just 2 years after you conquered it could be dangerous. So Rabbi stops. He stops his mission, the Rebbe said, and he listens. He cancels the digging. But then in 1981, years passed, and in the middle of the night, he gets a phone call, Rabbi gets, from an engineer, because as a result of the various excavations that they had done, there was near what's called Warren's Gate, because it was discovered by a British general called Warren in that area. It was so delicate that something had collapsed, and they discovered a hole that actually broke through or around that trapdoor that years earlier they discovered. So in other words, there was this huge cavern that was revealed that was filled with water and mud because the Ottomans used to use it. That's a whole other story. But Rabbi Getz, when he heard this, he writes in his diary that he describes the emotion, and he quickly ran to the mikveh, and he ran to go to that space to start praying in this holy space. And they couldn't believe that his years-long dream was about to come true, that they decided to penetrate deeper inside the tunnel, and they were going to finally find the ark. Now, because the area was flooded with water, so it delayed the excavations. They needed to pump the water, and when the pumping wasn't working because it was just too narrow, they literally had to go bucket by bucket, people coming carrying water out of that space. But sure enough, eventually, as is politics, the news gets out, the media finds out, and politicians find out, and the secret becomes public knowledge, and eventually it completely sparks tremendous anger from the Arabs when they found out about this, and there was tremendous violence. And again, it was in the afternoon when Rabbi Getz was in his home. He lived near the Kosel. he got a phone call again to come run to the Kotel tunnels because there was a dramatic twist. The Arabs now were breaking through from their area into this tunnel through another entrance from the Temple Mount. And when he got there, he finds a whole mob with whatever they could find, makeshift weapons, rods and poles and sticks. And he was one man against this mob of Arabs, and they were threatening him. But he actually, fortunately, had a gun, and he pointed it. This is a rabbi. Even the rabbis have in Israel carry. And he draws his gun and he warns them not to come any closer. But he was trying to stall. Even if with a gun, maybe he would take out one or two, but he was completely outnumbered. So he kind of was stalling them until actually a group of yeshiva students and some of his own students came to back him up. So there was this whole standoff going on in this tunnel, the rabbi and his yeshiva boys and this Arab mob. But right in front of his eyes, he couldn't stop them from accomplishing the goal, and they actually they brought in a lot of concrete blocks and tremendous amounts of cement, and they poured it into the tunnel. And right before his eyes, they completely sealed up the tunnel from where he believed was the pathway to the cave.
The Jews sealed off the tunnel?
No, the Arabs. The Arabs from their own, they had easier access. So right from above, they completely sealed off where he can go, and literally his dream was buried before his eyes as they sealed it up. And that's essentially how the story came to an end. But there is today, and this is called it's like they named it Rabbi Getz's shul after him, this little synagogue. So you can see it's like very narrow. And this is the gate, I think, that's sealed off. They say that you this is basically the holiest place you can go to today, the holiest space. And Rabbi Getz, the rest of his life, would actually come here, and every night he had this ritual. It's interesting. During the day, he had to play politics. He was the rabbi of the Kaisel. He had to deal with all kinds of pressure, media. There were government officials that would come visit. He had the Israeli government on his hands, who he was very upset with because they were taking the sides of the Arabs. So during the day, he had this tremendous pressure, but then every night, he was like a different person. And some of his students write in his biography, his ritual that 11:30 at night, he'd wake up, he would go to the mikveh, he'd go to the ritual path, and then he would make his way to this place, and he would take a map, he'd take off his shoes, he would pull out a rug, and he would sit and he would just cry for the morning of the temple and praying for redemption. So he was a very, very holy man, and he was very passionate. It's interesting that around this time, when there was this standoff with the Arabs, this is the sikha, this the analysis that the Rebbe, that we learned today about the Rebbe's analysis on the Rambam, and how the Rebbe learns basically that according to the Rambam, according to Maimonides, the ark is still there, the holiness is still there, and therefore it has to be protected, unbeknownst to the Rebbe that necessarily, or at least we don't know, or Rabbi Getz certainly wasn't aware that the Rebbe was discussing this all the way in New York. And this is the Rebbe's point. This is a very holy space. Obviously, with divine providence, it wasn't to be. But you see how the Rebbe's concern came true, because messing around with this area, again, could compromise national security, and you have to be very, very careful. But the lesson for us is obviously that the whole Beis HaMikdash is mentioned in many places in Kabbalah and Chassidus, is one big parallel, it's one big mashal, it's a parable for our own, the human organism. And the different vessels represent different organs, and specifically the ark represents the heart of a Jew. And just like the heart of the Jew externally could seem like, on the outside it looks like everything's in ruins, and we're in exile, and we're struggling, but you should know that even in exile, even as we sleep, the heart, I'm awake. Ani yeshna b'libi er, as the verse says. That the soul of a Jew can never be destroyed. Like famously, the previous Rabbi, when he was sent into exile under communist Russia, and he was Chassidim were crying, and he consoled them, and he said, you should know that our enemies can only send our bodies into exile, but they can never send our souls. Our souls always stay connected and are pure and are powerful. And that's connected, that's in connection with the ark, buried beneath despite everything that's going on over there, and all the mishigas and all the terrorist attacks that happen in the name of this area, the holy ark, the space, the Jewish core is always there and will never be destroyed. And God willing, Mashiach will come and reveal it in our time.